Welcome back to another episode of Podcast on the Brink. Another week, another first-time guest. William McDermott of Inside the Hall is here for what I hope will be many appearances throughout the season. William, you broadcasted the exhibition opener this week, or over the weekend, against Marion. I was there in attendance, but I told you before we hit record, I had a chance to go back and listen to a good part of that broadcast. You and Amanda did a terrific job, so I wanted to start out saying that. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate that. It's been so good to hear kind of everybody's feedback about how well it went and how, people just thought it went great. I tweeted this out a few days ago, but I went on YouTube like a couple days later and I saw like somebody had posted like highlights of it and it had like 15,000 views. And I don't know. It's been an awesome, it was a really, really cool experience, something that I'm never going to forget. And hopefully, next year, maybe I'll get another chance to do an exhibition or maybe even a regular season game. But just I've been so overjoyed by just what people have been saying and the support that Amanda and I have gotten. I know if she could say that she would, and she thought it went really well. And it was just a really fun experience.
One thing that's really impressed me about both of you is how well-rounded you are just in terms of what you do. You obviously have a passion for broadcasting, but you're writing for Inside the Hall. And I've told you this kind of when we were talking through last spring, the process of joining the Inside the Hall team. As a student, I think it's great to do as many things as possible and make yourself as well-rounded. When you go out into the real world, I think it's going to be very appealing for prospective employers. So, like I said, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with you this season. I'm just curious how you were feeling, I guess, going into it. Were you nervous at all? Like, what was the preparation? It's obviously a little bit different, I would assume, than broadcasting a game for WIUX when you're actually going to be on TV and yeah, there's some people obviously listening to WIUX, but I assume this is probably the largest audience you've had for a broadcast so far.
Probably ever. Yeah. It's way different than radio in the fact of like, you really have to make sure you're on your A game with stuff like little stats or little just interesting tidbits of information about each player. In radio, it's so like you just have to know the numbers and the names and stuff like that. That's really what's most important because you're not going to have time to look down at your boards and stuff. But with TV, we really tried to like find interesting things about people. So we ended up scheduling a meeting with the Marion coach the week before. We talked to him for like 45 minutes and doing things like that. We had a production meeting with our producers. So we talked about what graphics we wanted to run, what were some things we wanted to talk about it, just so like all those things were prepped. Like we had a graphic on the freshmen, the series history, stuff like that, the non-conference schedule for Indiana, stuff like that are major storylines heading into the season. Those were some things that we just had to walk through in the week leading up to it. But no, I was so nervous. I was so nervous, man. I mean, it's like you go into it and I expected to be nervous, but once you kind of get there and you're sitting courtside and people are coming up to you and asking you if you're ready or whatever, and you start talking on air to the producers with Big Ten Network in Chicago, it's just like, that's when it starts. Like, I guess for me, I kind of kicked into, I'm in work mode. And once the broadcast goes, I felt pretty good. So the hard part is just getting over that hump of getting on air initially.
Yeah, hopefully I didn't add to your nerves. I came over and told you and Amanda good luck before the game.
No, I appreciate it.
I knew it was I knew it was a big moment for both of you and something that you were both looking forward to. So I'm glad that it went well. So for this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink, what I did was went into the Inside the Hall community over at members.insidethehall.com and asked folks for some questions. I figured we'd do a mailbag episode this week, and I had William on to help me answer these questions. And I'll just start with the first question that I got. I can answer this briefly from a couple of people asking just in general about injury updates on Trace Jackson Davis and Tamar Bates. We have not talked to Mike Woodson since Saturday. He's not going to talk to the media again before Thursday. My sense is if neither player is 100% healthy, they're going to continue to sit out. If they're ready to go, they're going to play. And I think that kind of applies going into the start of the regular season here. I think the first game that you circle on the calendar and say Indiana really needs to be at full strength is at Xavier. I'm not saying that they wouldn't like to have everybody available next week when the regular season starts, but I think it's most important to have everybody as healthy as possible. And so that's not an actual update on either player, whether they're actually going to play on Thursday or Monday or next Thursday. But I would say at this point in the season, you want to be as cautious as possible with injuries. And I think Indiana is going to continue to do that. So let's dive into some of the questions here, William. I'll kind of introduce each question and you can chime in with your thoughts and I'll add my commentary as well where applicable. But the first question is talking about the non-conference marquee games. They didn't include Xavier in the question, but talking about Kansas, North Carolina, Arizona, if Indiana is able to win 2 of those 3 games or all 3, what will be the reason they were able to win those games? What do you think on that? And disclaimer here, William, like Tyler Tashman, grew up following North Carolina basketball. So that will be a night for him, just like with Tyler. Well, it'll be an interesting night. A lot of fun to cover that game. But what do you think just on those 3 games in general? If Indiana is to be successful, what are they going to have to do well to win those?
I think they're going to have to. I think their defense is going to have to be dominant. And then I also think they're going to have to get a lot of bench production. I think on all these teams that are top 25, and especially you think of North Carolina, Kansas, and Arizona, is like they have all of these teams probably have more talent than Indiana does, 1 through 10. And Indiana's going to have to, and this was a main problem, and I think there's a question on this later on. Last year is that second unit for Indiana just really struggled scoring the basketball, especially when Trey Galloway was injured. So that's something. Those are 2 things that jump out to me right away. Is defensively, they're going to have to be, they're going to have to play like they're the best defensive team in the Big Ten, and then they're going to have to get some bench production because you can count on Trace to get you 15 and Race and Xavier to probably get you around 10, especially in those big games. But other than that, they're going to have to find other scorers. I don't know if that's a Miller Kopp or Jalen Hood-Schifino, Malik Reneau. Someone like that is going to have to step up.
I would agree with a lot of that. The one thing that I've kind of cautioned people about these non-conference games entering the season, I get a lot of questions, is Indiana, what do you think they're going to do in these 4 games? What's the record? Personally, my opinion, if they go 2-2 in those 4 games, I think they've done really well for themselves. People don't want to hear that. They obviously want to hear they're going to go 3-1, they're going to go 4-0. But let's just look at each of these from a logical perspective. At Xavier is the first road game of the season. It's going to be an environment that's formidable. They've got Sean Miller now returning to their program. There's excitement. They're not a pushover. It's going to be a game where Indiana is going to be tested. North Carolina at home. I've been in Assembly Hall in some of the craziest environments. This one will definitely be up there. I think it's obviously a game Indiana could win, but they're going to have to play very well in order to do so. At Kansas, or I guess Arizona's next. It's in Las Vegas. It's a neutral court game against another top 20 team. You kind of go in as a toss-up game on paper. At Kansas, teams typically don't win non-conference road games at Kansas. I know Kentucky did it last year, but these are all hard games. And so I think there's a scenario where Indiana can play really well and lose any of those games. So you have to really look at those in the sense of if Indiana splits these 4 games, I think they've done really well for themselves. And that's kind of the the perspective that I'm taking. I know fans don't want to hear that. They want to win every game, but that's obviously not always realistic. Let's move on to another question here about substitution patterns. The question is, do you see the substitution patterns in the non-warm-up games? Example being like versus a Xavier, a tougher team varying from last year. The question mentioning that you've heard Woodson already talking about Unit 1 and Unit 2 a couple of times. To me, those are kind of NBA terms. I think that kind of drives fans a little bit nuts when you see like these mass substitutions, because that's kind of what happens in the NBA sometimes. My opinion, and you can chime in here, William, too, is that we're going to see obviously tighter rotations against tougher opponents. But I am interested to see just in general how Woodson manages the bench this year opposed to last year, because I thought at times last year there were situations where he was a little bit too aggressive maybe in subbing in terms of numbers. I don't necessarily think you want to get in a situation where you've got your second five on the court together against North Carolina.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's kind of what we saw last year. And this is kind of what I was hinting at earlier, is like just the second unit last year. It just, when Woodson would put them in against a Purdue or against an Illinois or a Michigan even, they just could not score. They just couldn't score. Michael Durr, you couldn't count on. He'd get in foul trouble. Trey Galloway couldn't stay healthy. Jordan Geronimo didn't really do anything till the last like 2 weeks of the season. Tamar Bates, he had flashes, but he's a true freshman and he struggled defensively. I think I'm with you. I think this year he's going to be a little bit tighter, but this is also a situation like this is the most talent we've ever seen on or not ever, but that we've seen on an Indiana bench in a long time. I mean, you're going to have Tamar Bates, who's a former 5-star, likely coming off the bench. You're going to have Malik Renew, who he's a 5-star, and we know he can score the basketball in the post. You're going to have Jordan Geronimo and Trey Galloway, 2 solid juniors. And then Hood Schifino's probably going to be running the point for that second unit. So it's like, that's 3 5-stars in that. And I think there's going to be some growing pains in terms of the younger guys just being able to get acclimated to the Big Ten, and especially in those big games against like Xavier and North Carolina, like you mentioned. And those are the games where you're really early on in the season going to have to lean on your older guys. But I think these, and especially the game against Marion and this game against St. Francis tomorrow, and even the Morehead State and Bethune-Cookman games next week, those are really going to be good opportunities, especially if Tamar and Trace don't play because of injury. Like it's going to be good for Woody to figure out what rotation for the bench to do and how deep he wants to go. Because last year there were games we'd see 10, 11 guys play in a Big Ten game. I don't know if Indiana's to be successful, he can do that again. But on the other side, this is the most talent they've ever had on the bench, especially under Woodson, far more than last year and in a long time. So I don't really know. I think for the big games, I think you got to go with your 8 best guys, maybe 9. But that's kind of where I see it.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at a situation on the bench where entering the season, Anthony Leal and Caleb Banks are maybe your 12 and 13. That's, there were years in the Archie Miller era that Indiana would have loved to have those that talent at the end of the bench. So they're in a good position, I think, talent-wise, but I still come back to the fact that the best teams that I've seen in college basketball over a long, sustained period of time are usually playing 8 or 9 guys, as you mentioned. There's exceptions to that. There was a Kentucky team that almost went undefeated that had a platoon system, but they also had, so many NBA guys that they had Devin Booker coming off Devin Booker off the bench. So this is not what Indiana has. So yeah, I think it's fine in these early games to get guys that experience and mix and match lineups, but there was far too many times last year where Indiana, as you said, had lineups on the court where they just couldn't score consistently enough. Early impressions on CJ Gunn. Do you think this is the question? Do you think he has the potential to displace some of Miller Kopp's minutes by the time Big Ten season gets in full swing? I'm not going to speculate on Miller Kopp's minutes as it relates to CJ Gunn, but what I will say about CJ Gunn is that he really impressed me in the exhibition game with how quickly he got a shot off and how good his release looked. He did not look scared. He looked ready to come out there and fire away. And I think that's what Indiana needs out of him, particularly with the recent history of lacking perimeter shooting with the program.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the perimeter shooters Indiana's had in recent years, and I think last year you look at Parker Stewart, and you think CJ Gunn really, out of all of them, is probably the most fit to just be a true shooter. You mentioned like he's a confident shooter. I mean, he shot like 37% in high school, not bad. But he also was their leading scorer and got to the rim as well. He's bigger than you would think. He really is. He's 6'6". He's got a lot of length. He's better defensively, I think, than people think he is because of that length. And if he can defend, he's going to find a way to get on the court, especially for Mike Woodson. I'm not saying he's going to, make 2 threes a game like he did against Marion, or even I think he played like 20 minutes against Marion. He's not going to see the court that much, but he's one of those guys where if his number's called, he's not going to back down. He's going to go in there. He's tough. He's going to defend. He gives you size. I think when you watch him play, the first thing you notice is just his release is so smooth and he gets so much elevation on his jump shots. He's really good against the fast closeout, getting a shot over big men, taller guys in college. I think it's going to be easier for him than a Parker Stewart, who had more so a slower, just kind of trigger release. When you watch CJ Gunn, it's just a lot more smooth. I think he's going to be like the 10th or 11th guy in the rotation. I don't know if you can really put him in at the guard spot over a Miller Kopp or a Tamar Bates or Jalen Hood-Schifino. But I think down the road, and I wrote this in my preseason profile on him, but down the road, I really think he has a capability to be a leading scorer on this team. He just has that. He can score from all 3 levels. He's sneakily athletic. I think fans should be really excited for him in the future.
I agree with everything you said there. Next question is in regards to the level of play in the first exhibition versus tomorrow night. This is the question. What should we expect in terms of a noticeable difference between the 2 exhibition games? And the question also addresses wanting to see better play out of Xavier Johnson, Jordan Geronimo, and Caleb Banks. Obviously, that's kind of pointing out the 3 guys who I guess didn't particularly play very well, but in a given game, you're going to have guys that don't play very well. So I wouldn't read too much into the first exhibition. And I felt like Indiana played pretty well in the first game. They won by 36 points, and it was never really close. Obviously, they're playing an NAIA team, but really the thing I watch in these exhibition games is really defense with Indiana, because I feel like they're going to have to win a lot of games with defense, and they shot the ball well from the 3-point line, obviously in the first game, but overall, I just kind of watch energy and how hard they're playing in defense first, and I feel like the other things kind of fall into line as you move along through the season.
Yeah, I don't think we'll see too much difference between Marion and tomorrow night's game. I think the biggest thing for exhibitions, and Woodson talked about this on his radio show, is he's just trying to figure out what combination of guys works the best. What groups have the most chemistry when they're on the floor together? What groups are playing well defensively when they're out there together? What groups are playing well defensively, but they're not scoring, or they're scoring a lot, but they're not playing hard on defense? Stuff like that. That's kind of what these games are for. And I think, you look at Xavier Johnson's performance, I think he was like 1 of 9 from the field, or 2 of 9 from the field, but he just didn't shoot the ball that well. I think he played pretty well when he was out there. He played hard. And you could tell he was frustrated when he wasn't making a lot of shots. I wouldn't read into that too much. I think, I don't know. I think in the next exhibition, I don't think the starters will play as much, especially if Tamara and Trace play. But once again, I think these things are really to see lineups and to see, sorry about that, and to see what combination of guys fits the best.
Yeah, it's hard to really draw too many conclusions against a game that doesn't count in the standings. Ultimately, I think you really want to get through it with kind of working on whatever you've talked about as a game plan going into the game and getting out of the game with nobody getting hurt. I think that's really the goal, just to get to the regular season and get the actual games that count started. The next question is in regards to depth. I think we kind of touched on this a little bit, but it says if Leal is number 13 on the roster, how is this going to work? I personally love Leal, but is not going to play very much. Felt like we had no minutes, and that was without Trace Jackson Davis and Tamar Bates. So it's kind of in a weird situation now with Indiana basketball. We went from last season, people were complaining that there weren't enough good players in terms of the second unit, and now it's people wondering how they're going to accommodate all these players. It's kind of a good position to be in as a program to have this much talent. This is what you want when you're building a program. You want to have options, because the worst thing you can have going into a season or going into a game is guys who are kind of complacent and feel like they're going to play no matter what. And in a situation like this where you have more competition for minutes, I think this is how you get better as a team.
No, I'm 100% with you. I think it really helps in terms of just that practice environment, being able to have guys compete for spots rather than, like you said, know that no matter what, they're going to get 20 minutes off the bench, no matter how bad they play, because they have to play. And it also just helps from an injury perspective, just kind of that, next man up attitude mentality. In terms of Anthony Leal, it's just like, I don't know. I've had a really hard time seeing where he fits with Woodson as the head coach. I know under Archie, his freshman year, like he had those flashes, and Archie, it's his recruit. So obviously he's going to play him. I think he had like 9 points in that game at Wisconsin his freshman year. And, this kid can really shoot the ball, but I just don't think he provides enough athleticism. And he was he was inconsistent with his shot last season when he got in there. He started 2 games that he didn't play well in those games. And it's, it's hard to see where he fits. But another way, talking to him at media day, was like, he's just a great guy. Like he wants to root for his teammates. And he kind of gave the notion to me that, he doesn't care if he plays or not. Obviously he wants to play, but if the team is winning and he's on the bench energizing guys and getting excited and building good energy and vibes around the program, and being a good friend and being a good teammate, that's all he really cares about. And I think that's maturity from him on that level. But it's just hard to see where he fits on in terms of just playing. But I think overall, he does have a role, and he has that role of being a supportive teammate, being competitive. When he gets in, he's going to give effort, and he's going to do his best. And that's really all you can ask for a kid on your team to do.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned Trey Galloway. He's another guy that he's going to be fighting for minutes. And then you look ahead to next season. We don't know exactly who's going to be here and who's not going to be here, but we know that Indiana's bringing in Gabe Cupps and Ja'Kai Newton, and I'm sure is going to still be trying to get guys in the portal next spring. So, with Leo, ultimately, maybe he doesn't ever blossom into the guy with a regular role, but if he's content with being, one of the last guys on the bench, but, getting a great education at IU, kind of being in the city that he's from and being a part of a winning team, there's value in that to the program. So I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about his minutes. Next question is in regards to Trace Jackson Davis in comparisons to Cody Zeller. And this was something that I actually thought about a little bit. Let me just kind of read through this. We saw a video of Trace Jackson Davis hitting outside shots when he was testing the NBA draft. Is that something you think we'll see more of this year from Trace Jackson Davis? We'll start with that part of it, and then we can go on to the rest of it. William, do you think we're going to see more of that this season from Trace Jackson Davis?
No, I do not. I do not think we'll see it. I know this has been, people have just been, it's been like this for 3 years with him, but I don't think we're going to see it. I really don't. And that's okay. Like, he doesn't, in order for this team to win, it's not like he needs to be pulling up from three, bringing the ball down the court, doing spin moves like Blake Griffin was when he was with the LA Clippers. Like, he doesn't need to be that kind of player. He just needs to be a back to the basket. I'm going to get this rebound. I'm going to block this shot, and I'm a scorer. That's what he needs to do for this team to win. And Indiana's been most successful when he's done that at a high level. They don't need him to be jacking up threes, or even I know Woodson has talked about like him being able to shoot from 15 feet out. Like, even then, like, he doesn't really, like, that's really not necessary, especially if Race Thompson can stretch the floor like he did against Marion. He definitely needs to improve as a free throw shooter. You're not going to succeed in the NBA if you're shooting 60% from the line as an undersized big man. So that's definitely something he needs to do. And I think he needs to be a little bit better off the dribble in the post when he's facing up guys. But if he can just have a dominant left hand, he can defend at a high level like he did last season, and he can rebound at a high level, averaging like 18 points a game. That's what he needs to do for Indiana to succeed. And in terms of the Cody Zeller thing, maybe we can talk about that later after you chime in.
No, we can talk about that. Let me say a couple of things. Part of the reason that this is discussed in terms of the shooting is because anyone that follows the NBA, which I follow pretty closely, I don't know how close you follow the league, but if you're going to make it in the NBA now, and you're not, I mean, we saw this with Kofi, right? Kofi came out last year. He's not on a roster. So you're not going to just make the NBA because you're a big guy and can dunk the ball and make plays at the rim. The NBA looks for guys that are athletic, that can shoot the ball. You mentioned the free throw shooting. I think that's a pretty big deal, because when you're projecting a player forward, or whether they can stretch their game out to the perimeter, you look at free throw shooting and say, can this person shoot, and can we make them into a decent perimeter shooter? So that's one reason why the shooting's talked about. There's two different conversations here. The first conversation is, what does Indiana need from Trace Jackson Davis to be successful as a team? You laid that out pretty clearly, what Indiana needs from him. More of what we saw last season. He was really good. He was in the conversation for first team All Big Ten. He's the preseason Big Ten Player of the Year. He's all of that without shooting 3-pointers or shooting long shots. Okay. So the second part of the conversation is, what does Trace Jackson Davis need to do to make himself a more appealing NBA prospect? I'm not sure that he can at this point, for a couple reasons, because he's as old as he is. The NBA is going to look at him and say he's 22 or 23 years old. So I'd rather draft somebody that's 18 or 19 that I can develop myself and maybe has long-term potential. And if I am going to take a chance on this guy, I do want to see better shooting. And you mentioned the free throw shooting as, a thing that really needs to get better. All right, let's get into the Cody Zeller thing. So the second part of this question says, TJD reminds me of a Cody Zeller. Great defense, good low post presence and footwork, can run to the basket and finish at the rim. Why do you think Cody went number 4 overall and TJD is looking like a second round pick or undrafted? I've got thoughts on this. You can go ahead first, though.
Go ahead. Okay. I just think the league has just changed so much since Cody Zeller got drafted. I mean, like, if Cody Zeller was coming out of Indiana, even last season or this season, he might be a late first round pick. Like, I really don't think number 4 overall. And this is one thing I was thinking about this earlier when you sent this out, but that Cody Zeller out of high school was the best player in his class. Trace was one of the best. He was in 30s to 20s, I think.
Well, Cody
That
was what? He was
matters.
Cody was top 10. He wasn't number one. Anthony
Oh, okay.
Davis was number one, but he was
Yeah.
he was top 10 depending on where you want to look. But yeah, Trace was more 20 to 30.
Yeah. I think that matters, to be honest. And maybe it shouldn't as much as it does, but I really think, NBA scouts put labels on these guys when they go to college, and they check back on them right after high school and say, okay, how's this guy doing? Or what's this guy up to? Cody Zeller, I remember, so when I grew up a huge Carolina fan, and I think we saw a similar thing with his brother Tyler Zeller, who went on to play at Carolina, is there was always hope. Like there was always like hope, like he'll be able to develop a jumper. Like it's okay for him. This is just how he's succeeding at college. If he really needed to, like he could step out and make some threes. And when they got to the NBA, that just never happened. That's kind of my stance on it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just the league has changed so much in the 10 years that it's been since, that draft class. And, you see the guys getting picked in the top 10. You mentioned it, like you look at the forwards last year that got drafted, Jabari Smith, guys like that, like the ability
Paulo
to be
can shoot.
Paulo, spread the floor at the size they have, run the floor as well. You have to have good ball skills now to be a big man in the NBA. Because, I mean, you're going to be guarding the Greek freak and Nikola Jokic every single night. You're going to have to do those things. And I just don't think Trace's role would be that in the NBA. I really don't. If I've always thought of this comparison for Trace, if he were to make the NBA and develop a jumper, I think he could have a career similar to a guy like Grant Williams, who came out of Tennessee a few years ago. I remember in college, I mean, that dude rarely shot. I mean, he rarely shot from the outside. And he's similar size, even smaller than Trace. I think Trace is a little more athletic than him, so he can make up for him in that ground. But I feel like that's a reasonable comparison for a type of career that we could expect. But I think the thing you mentioned with the age for Trace is a good point, because he's a senior. He's 22. You kind of know what you're getting with him. And this isn't the time to be experimental with Indiana basketball on him. It's not like Indiana's supposed to be bad and he can just start halfway through the season when they're 10-10, start just throwing up jumpers and going for 40 points a night. That's not what the case is going to be this year.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things. Cody Zeller, I feel, was a more skilled player than Trace Jackson Davis. That's not to take anything away from Trace, but I just think in general, Cody was a more talented player when he was at Indiana than Trace is. That's not to say that he was more productive in terms of stats or anything like that. I just, I feel like he made other people better. You mentioned the free throw shooting. It's not and I'm not saying Trace doesn't make others better, but I think Cody did that at a higher level. The free throw shooting, Trace is the career 67% free throw shooter. Cody, I think, was 75. So maybe you say that's not a huge difference, but I think it is. I think one of the reasons that Cody went number 4 is I think NBA teams saw a guy that could shoot and thought that they could probably stretch him out a little bit and make him a 3-point shooter. I think there was a stretch in his career where he was trying to take some threes that never really materialized. He was you talk about Trace being able to run the floor. Cody Zeller, since I've been covering Indiana basketball since 2007, is the best run the floor big man that I've seen. As good as Trace Jackson Davis is at that, Cody Zeller was better. So, William, you make some great points. I mean, the NBA is different now than it was in 2013. If Cody Zeller was coming out now, there's no way he would be the number 4 pick. But, he made $75 million in his career. He's not in the league this year. He was signed, I think, by Utah and then cut in training camp. So he's got 75 million. Knowing Cody like I do, he probably has all 75 million. And is going to, if he doesn't have to play basketball another day in his life, he's going to be just fine. With Trace, I think the biggest thing he can do this season is win a lot of games and take his team on a deep tournament run.
Get
an NBA team, spotlight. Right? Yeah, right. An NBA team's going to say, this guy came to a program that was not in a very good spot, and by the time he left, they were competing for the Big Ten championship, and they were going on a deep tournament run, and he was the reason, one of the focal points of that. I don't necessarily think he needs to be taking 3-pointers, and it's not going to be necessarily good for Indiana. So as much as we like to talk about that in the media and write about it and ask Coach Woodson about it, for Indiana basketball, not necessarily the best thing. So William, before we go on this week's episode, this is just a question from me to you as we get ready to open the season 5 days from now. The games are going to start coming pretty quickly. Xavier in North Carolina, both in November, and then obviously you got a Big Ten game in December along with Kansas and Arizona. What are you going to be looking for early in the season from this team when you evaluate how much better they are, if we can start to buy into this whole top 15? I've been a little bit less. I think Indiana deserves to be ranked in the preseason. I won't go as high as some of, I think they've been as high as 6 or 7, depending on where you look. I think that's a little bit too high. I'm more in the 15 to 25 range, being more realistic to start the season. But what are you going to look for here this first couple weeks of the season to give you an indication of where Indiana is as a team?
I think we're going to have to see I think the big things are, can Indiana's offense be multidimensional, and can they do a lot of different things and a lot of different things well? And we saw that towards the end of the season when you think of that Big Ten tournament run they had last year, which if they don't go on that run and make the tournament, they're definitely not going to be ranked 13th in the country. Who knows if they get Malik Renew as a recruit? I mean, so many what ifs there. But I think can they be multidimensional? Can Xavier Johnson lead the offense well in a pick and roll? Can they make threes, open threes? And I think the other big thing is, how big of difference makers are these freshmen really going to be? I mean, I know the game against Marion, they were huge difference makers. Renew led the team in scoring. Hochefino had 8 points, 4 rebounds, a couple of assists. I think he had 10 points. I'm not sure. But are they actually going to be difference makers when it comes to those games at Xavier against North Carolina when Big Ten play starts? Are they going to be able to get 8-10 points a game? Is Renew going to be able to come off the bench and score and work in the post and defend at a high level? I think those are all the questions that I'm looking for, because if the freshmen and newcomers can do that, especially early on in the season, it's going to be a really good sign for Indiana, especially towards the latter half of Big Ten play, and just for the future of the program. I think those are the big things. In terms of Indiana's offense, I really think, and we saw this a little bit against Marion, but it's hard to judge against an NAIA school. I think they need to get out and transition a little bit more. I think that was a big thing last year. It just became so Xavier Johnson dribbles the ball up. Let me find Trace in the post, see what he can do. If he misses, hopefully we get his rebound and then work the offense again. And then they started doing more screening actions and pick and rolls, and that worked. But I think they need to find other options offensively. And I think getting in transition is the best way to do that. Especially when now you have 2 playmaking guards with Hochefino in there. If he's in the starting unit, he's going to be able to facilitate. And Parker Stewart couldn't really do that. He was turnover prone. So I think that's really going to be a thing I'm looking out for.
William, it's been awesome to have you on the Inside the Hall team so far this season. I know we're just getting ready to get started with a lot more of the season here, and it's going to be a lot of fun working with you. Thanks for coming on the show this week. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Podcast on the Brink. If you enjoy the show, as always, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify. That really helps us grow the show and get raise more awareness for Indiana basketball fans who may not know about us. So thanks for doing that. And we will talk to everybody again next week on another episode of Podcast on the Brink.